This episode is proudly sponsored by Resilience Through Fitness. RTF's whole body health approach focuses on helping first responders get adequate rest, fuel, and physical preparedness for their challenging shifts serving the communities they love. The RTF coaching staff are all current first responders that have a passion for fitness. With one-on-one online coaching tailored specifically to your gym, home, or traveling needs, the staff strives to ensure that you come home safe at the end of the shift. RTF also donates a portion of select sales back to supporting veteran and first responder charities. Use the discount code GRITTY15 for 15% off your personalized coaching or next order online. That's GRITTY15 at resiliencethroughfitness.com. All one word, resiliencethroughfitness.com. Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric. Today I'm joined by two experts, and I'm very excited. I can even say more excited than normal because we've already had this fantastic discussion, and we had a technical issue, and I was super bummed and frustrated and taking it into the software trying to manipulate some things. But I'm very grateful to have both of these experts rescheduled and coming back. And we're going to be talking about relational issues, challenges, and solutions relating to first responder relationships. There's a lot of listener and follower questions that came in about this in the last couple months. And specifically, it was talking about these really uncomfortable things that we ought to face head on so that we can be constructive for ourselves, for our families, and also for our peers, right? Because it's always that peer support element, looking out for those in the network, in the organization. So we're talking about risk-seeking behaviors, we're talking about loss of intimacy, communicational issues, and ultimately what can lead to broken relationships and divorce. And so before I started off too heavy, again, a reminder that we're going to be talking about skills, things to work on constructively, and solutions. But first off, I want to introduce our guests, Ther and Dr. Mynda. But yeah, Ther, if you could start with a little introduction about yourself and what we're going to be talking about today.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for having us here again. I'm excited to see you both and listen to you both once more and all your knowledge. My name is Esther Horowitz. I'm a licensed practitioner in the state of Colorado. I'm also licensed to work with couples and I'm bilingual. I currently work at CU Boulder. I've been working with couples and families for over a decade. And I'm also certified to work with first responders. So yeah, there's a lot. I recently, since the last time we all met, I got certified in a specific trauma training as well. So
Great.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Great. Thank you, Ther. Dr. Mynda.
Hello. Well, for me, I have a licensed marriage family therapist, and then I have a PhD in family studies. I was a first responder. Been married 29 years to a first responder that just retired after 34 years. My son has been a firefighter now in California for about 5 years. And this topic became really, it became a passion for me watching my husband and knowing my own slides that I still deal with, 26 years later, I still have. And so I exclusively work with first responders and their families, and I speak at different conferences and I teach as well. I not only work with fire, but I work with police as well. And here in Las Vegas, I'm on the hostage negotiation team. And so I work really close with our local police agencies out here.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Dr. Mynda, and thank you for your service and your continued service in that of your family. So without further ado, we're just going to dig into it. So when we talk about a lot of these things for first responders, we get it. We were introduced to some of these concepts maybe back in academy. Maybe our agencies and kind of circles are better about reminding us about these things. But I think that it requires and necessitates continual conversation because like most habits, we slide back into it. And when we're in work brain and we're in work week, I feel myself, even though I don't deal with a lot of what our first responders do with working overnight and all that and being on the street, I still feel myself kind of go back into those tendencies. But if either of you want to start, maybe Dr. Mynda, because you were a first responder personally as well, and then the spouse element of what are some of those things that create this really challenging environment?
I think one of the things that took me a long time to figure out was as a spouse and then as a clinician was that it's really the work brain that's kind of the culprit in a lot of the things that happen in the home. And work brain, is what we train our brains and our bodies to get into. It's that muscle memory from the academy of the minute we put the uniform on. And, even if you think about the academy, it's a lot of repetitive muscle memory. And so there's always this level of adrenaline surging through your body. And when you go into that form, some version of fight or flight, with that comes, the hypervigilance. It's operational, it's task driven, and there's no emotions. They have to be set aside so you can go out there and do the job and be objective when you do the job. The problem is that it takes the body about 18 hours to flush all of those hormones that are needed to do your job effectively. And so when you walk in the door after your shift, you are still effectively in work brain. And so you're going to engage your family, your children, the people that you love most from that very operational mindset. And you're going to try to solve problems that way. You're not going to have the patience that you need. Your family is excited to see you. So they want to tell you all the details. And you're just like, get to the plot. Like, what is it you need me to do? What's the task at hand? And so it comes off very distant and very unemotional. And a lot of spouses end up taking that very personal, that it has to do with it's me that you're not happy with, or the way I run the house or the family that you're not happy with. And that's just not the case.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I'm kind of hearing is that it's a reminder that we may be uh, programmed and I guess habitualized, if that's a word. You can fact check me later. But if we're doing all these things that make us really effective at certain aspects of our job, which I not to detract too much, but interrupting people when we're interviewing them, which is like we all do it as cops for sure because we're like, hey, get to the point. I need probable cause. Uh, we all do it. But certain things that you explain, that operational brain, tactical brain, hypervigilance, makes us very successful for survival, for promoting safety in others in the community. However, it doesn't translate well to home life, right, with our loved ones.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. And the thing is like I hear so many of my first responders say, "Oh, I don't take work home with me." And I say, "Well, you're not talking about it." No, but if you really do understand the concept of work brain, Dr. Gil Martin talks about it in his book quite, frequently and a lot. He explains it even more in depth. But you're walking in the door, work brain. You're just not talking about it. And as a spouse myself, we get really good at reading our first responders. Like we can tell based on tone of your voice, the look on your face. And so we'll say like, "What's wrong?" And inevitably the words are nothing. I'm fine. Fine.
Mm,
But we're reading it. So then what we're doing then is we're interpreting and we're going to fill in the gaps. And so that's where the problem starts from the minute you step in the door and all this like perception starts to happen. And by lunchtime, there's already a fight or there's irritation or annoyances that is happening and we're not communicating is the main
yeah.
issue.
Yeah, sure. That hits because my wife will make fun of me because she can tell, even though she doesn't see what I'm doing or what phone I pick up, she can tell if I picked up the work phone or my personal phone. And she can
Mhm.
tell if it's someone from work. And if we're talking about work, or quickly, if it's someone from work and we're not talking about work, she can pick it all apart. Or if it's my boss or a subordinate or a peer, which is like very, the intuition is high. And so, yeah, just to illustrate that. Yeah, there. What are your thoughts on what Dr. Minda shared and discussed?
I agree with everything Dr. Mynda mentioned. I would also add that there's a work brain, there's also the identity piece of, yes, like you said, Dr. Mynda, I don't take work home, but you're not stepping out of the identity of being a first responder. Your nervous system and the chemicals in your system are not making a full stop of, okay, we're no longer at work, we are doing family or things that are not related to work now. So like you mentioned, it takes time for the body to recognize that it is no longer supposed to be showing up in certain ways. And then also thinking about the fact that sometimes our spouse is not a first responder and how that works. What is that dynamic like? What it's supposed to be like? If everyone in the relationship or in the marriage are first responders or have knowledge and wisdom about what it is like to be a first responder, it is going to be very different. So that's
Yeah.
what I would add. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's huge. I feel like there's so many conversations I've had on the show that were geared towards a specific topic. We might have even pre-planned it based on the guest and the career or their story. And a lot of times it becomes about identity and, dare I say, over investment in that identity or that piece of identity. And first responders, certainly a huge piece. Like there is this purpose bound piece that makes you even dive into this crazy kind of work. At the same time, I will also add from personal experience, when you are becoming a safe and successful police officer, that's not just something you turn off. And when you interact in the world, you see all these potential flags, these dangers, these risks. Let's go this way, not that way. I'm going to park here, not there. And I hear this sound outside, and now I'm on alert, even though it's 2 o'clock in the morning, or maybe especially because it's 2 o'clock in the morning. And I don't personally know whether that translates to fire EMS in the same way, but I have to imagine to some extent it does, because they're always caretakers and they're always looking for someone that might be in need and running into the stressful situation, not away from. And so I love that you brought that up early there, as far as recognizing how much more complicated it gets. It is different. Like I know we all have people, family. I have close friends that are very, very driven in their work in other sectors. And it permeates and it bleeds into their family time, but it's kind of a different dynamic, because whether or not you're answering that call is not ultimately the same potential implications of, us not showing up to work.
I would add that the schedules are also probably very different. Expectations might be very different. Going back to what Dr. Mynda mentioned, the lack of communication of what is this supposed to be like? What are our expectations moving forward? What do we want to do? Knowing that this becomes an identity, it's a strong set of skills that first responders have that are not part of regular life. So how do we manage this in the best way possible?
Yeah. Yeah, and that what you just said reminds me of you going back to that earlier piece that you shared, which is the complications and the dynamics of a first responder relationship where one party is not, right? Oftentimes you do see a lot of couples that are together through that commonality, that common bond, and then so there's a shared understanding. There's also complications therein, but let's go with the first responder spouse that is with a non-first responder spouse and what complications that creates, because although first responder spouses shout out every day, all day, or all the days, especially in that learning curve, which can be very dramatic and very extended, especially if we're not taking time to have these conversations and learn and seek these resources, like what kind of dynamics emerge there and how does that contribute to everything we're talking about?
Oh, I was going to say, well, what I'd like to add is that the one of the biggest issues when we talk about communication and trying to bridge that gap, whether your spouse is a first responder or not, is that the first responder is always doing threat assessment. And it doesn't matter if you're a cop or a firefighter, you're always doing some kind of threat assessment, and there's a certain way that you talk. And so if you're walking in the door in that work brain, so how you're interacting and trying to communicate is going to be in more of a harsh, direct, unemotional way. And especially for our non-first responder spouses that don't get it, they don't know. A lot of what I hear my clients tell me is that after a long shift, right, 10 or 12-hour shift, they don't have the energy to explain all the details to that spouse that may not get it. So they choose not to. Right? In their head, they kind of go through this really quick dialogue about, like, the spouse will say, "How was your day?" or "How was your shift?" And you start to think about all the calls you ran, all the people you encountered, and it's kind of like, where do I start? Then there's the concern that first responders don't want to burden their spouse with the horrific details of it. So they just opt to say nothing. And so where that causes a huge problem is in how do we connect with our spouses, right? And you guys are gone for such a long period of time. And most of the first responders I encounter love their job. They're very passionate about their job. It's what they've always wanted to do, it's what they've dreamed about. And they spend a lot of time at work. So if you aren't communicating or finding a way to talk about the job and setting up guidelines with your spouse, you're leaving a big part of who you are out of the relationship. I want to know that part of you. I want to experience that part of you. And it's okay to set up, I call them like rules, like guidelines. What do you want to know about? What can you handle hearing? Right. And then also on the first responder, how do you want to talk about the job? Maybe you don't want to get into the details and you just want to say, you know what? I had a really bad kid call today, but I don't want to relive it or rehash it, but I'm out of it today. It's not you. I just am not feeling really good about it today. And the spouse can respond, okay, is there anything I can do to help or support you? But setting up that framework to have this dialogue and these conversations is what's going to help make those relationships more successful than when we try to wing it. Because if we try to wing it, it's just not going to work. And the other issues is sometimes today, the first responder needs to talk about it. But tomorrow, they're like, I don't want to talk about it today. And so that's a pitfall my husband and I fell into, was me trying to mind read and guess what he needed day by day. And it changed. And it always felt like I got it wrong. And so that got in the way of our connection and our relationship. And the connection in our first responder relationships is critical. It's really critical because we're away from each other so much.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes me just think about how delicate and specific communication and success in general communication with anyone in your life, your boss, your coworker, your mother, father, your kid, your spouse, all these things can be so nuanced in just general, right? And then you add on all the stress and the complications of first responder life and this trauma that we're seeing and not wanting to overburden, not wanting to underburden, and like how do you navigate that? But what popped into my mind is, relational or like pre-marriage, uh, like a pre-marriage sit down, right? And a lot of folks do that where they maybe sit down with someone in their faith group or just a general counselor, or they just do kind of this worksheet and questionnaire that you can find online for free. And it made me realize that going through that, you have a lot of these kind of big topics, and we hit a lot of them, like, which was great for me and my wife now. But a lot of them are like, oh, these are really kind of uncomfortable, like prompts, which is great. We need to have this. But then I remember after doing that so many years ago, where I was like, man, a lot of people should just do this when they start getting serious in a relationship. And we don't learn these things. We don't learn these mechanisms oftentimes unless we had really intentional circles, parents, friends of parents, things like that to model after. But all just says to say that this is super complicated. So of course it gets more so. There, you have any thoughts on what Dr. Mynda said, or kind of just to expand on that communication aspect?
So much. I'm sitting here trying to be quiet because I get excited about this. I love working with couples and relationships. And yes, having a framework, having a structure that works for both people involved in the relationship rather than, like you were mentioning, winging it. It is important that it is a collaborative effort to find something that works for each one as individuals, that works for the system. If there are children as well, that works for everyone who's involved. Because nobody, like you mentioned, Eric, nobody teaches us what relationships should be like as we're growing up. We just kind of learn by watching others, and usually watching others is not the best way because we're not them and our spouse is not that other person. So just going back to what Dr. Mynda was mentioning earlier too, I was thinking about guilt and isolation and how first responders could be perfectionists and they could be excelling at their jobs. They're really good at what they're doing, and then they come home and they are failing. and they can watch this in their spouses' faces, in their children's faces, and they feel like they're failing, even if they're not being told that they're not showing up in ways that is might be expected. So that guilt might lead to isolation, and that, like Dr. Mynda mentioned, the lack of connection is just going to impact the first responder more, and it's going to, because first responders are together for so long when they're at work, then that becomes, sometimes, not always, it can become their primary relationships at work rather than their families or spouses becoming their primary relationships.
Yeah, absolutely, Thayer. What you said reminded me of, it may or may not have been in the first conversation, but essentially that, when we're succeeding at work and then we're not succeeding at home, then this can start this cycle of like, well, I'm really good at work, so I guess I'll just stay there because I seem to piss everyone off and do everything wrong and say the wrong thing or not say the right thing. So I'm just going to provide, and then that is productive, right? Because you're getting the high fives, you're getting the service, right? Like, oh, you put out that fire, or you responded and you were able to revive that patient. All these things. Whereas at work, and you're also earning, right? You're earning overtime, and that's contributing to the family. And then it just makes me think of like your typical scales, right? Your weighted scales, where so now it's out of balance because you're always at work, and then a lot of times we try to course correct by using that money to buy love, gifts, and extravagant vacations and an RV. And then it's, rather than trying to lessen the side that's down, like take things off of it, we try to add to the other side. And then it goes super wonky, right? Because you can't operate your life in vacation mode, like work and vacation. Like that's not realistic. So cool, we're in Disneyland, everyone's having a fun time, we got all these smiles, but then we have to go back to real life at some point. And then what have we done for that? And I'm not disparaging vacation. I'm a huge proponent of taking your leave, taking your time. I'm trying to illustrate like the imbalance with earning and spending more hours at work and being away from the family, which is really ultimately, whether it's the couple, the family, it's like you need that time to invest to repair and rehab. Maybe repairs, we're not even there. Maybe it's rehab and prehab.
I personally think too, what the other issue what you're talking about, Eric, makes me think of is that when you're in that work brain, right, it's adrenaline filled. It's like a drug. And our first responders get addicted to that feeling, that high in a sense. And you can't replicate that at home. It's just not the right, it's not the same. And so what happens when our relationships start to break down is that our first responder starts to think, well, my family just doesn't get me. But when I'm at work, they get me and they understand me. Why can't my family be like that? Why can't my spouse or my significant other get me like the people at work get me? And so there's this false idea that my marriage isn't working, my relationship isn't working, because we're comparing it to the relationships that we have at work. And so we're like, well, it must not be a good relationship because they just don't get me over here. And what people don't realize is over here, we're all on the same drug at work, right? We're all on adrenaline. We're all hyped. We're not paying bills together, right? We're not making life decisions together. It is fun. And just life is not fun 100% of the time, right? Parenting and adulting and, the stuff we have to do sometimes isn't always that fun. And so that's where I think the distorted thinking starts to happen. And our first responders truly believe my marriage just isn't working.
Mm-hmm. And that's where I recall that theme did lead into discussion of when work coworker flirtation happens, because, well, these people get me. And this person, my partner, like I go to 70% of the calls with, like he or she really truly understands me, sees me for me, and also celebrates what I'm good at, right? Whereas I just keep messing up, and where that slope starts to get slippery.
The risk taking behavior starts to increase because what happens, we see this in military too, and a lot of our first responders have military or are vets. So you're kind of getting that double whammy. And so what the risk taking behavior is you're always searching for that bump, that high. And any way you can get it, because when you have that adrenaline, you feel good, you feel invigorated, you feel like energetic. And so you're always looking for a way to do that. And one of the things that I'm seeing is a lot more like porn and sexting, because it is legal, right? It's not, you're not altered taking a drug or drinking, and you do get that little bump. And it is a way, unfortunately, for our first responders to avoid or get away from any bad feelings they are having or that they should be dealing with or talking about. And it prolongs them getting the help that they need. And it really does affect their relationships because, like Esther said, they start to isolate, they start to feel bad about themselves. And they do feel guilty because they know they're not doing right by their home life. And so it's just this vicious cycle. So I'll just do more of this because it makes me feel better instead of addressing the problem because they're scared to address the problem.
Yeah. There, do you have more on the risk-seeking behavior and that like flirting with the disaster that can tend to follow this culture?
Always. Always. I was thinking, going back to our first conversation, I was thinking about the theme of control. And we cannot really control our spouses, we cannot control our families, but I can control flirting with risky behaviors. I can control what I do when it comes to substances. I can control when it comes to really adventurous things. So it becomes also, or it could become something related to control, because knowing and feeling that I have control brings me a sense of safety. So I am seeking to feel safe and provide safety as well. So how do I do that? I look at what I can control, even if it is not the best thing for me or my family or my spouse. That's the only thing I was wanting to add to that.
Yeah, yeah, and I want to outline like from personal experience and observation in my environment and my peers, like there's a lot of times when in our careers we realize and we may even verbalize or admit it, and I'm admitting it now, where you went faster than you ought to have, and in the moment, in the heat of the moment, like you're getting that adrenaline. Sometimes it's not anything to do with this sexual conversation, so I don't want people to just think, oh, that's not me, I don't do any of it. Like you probably do in some way. That might be mouthing off to a suspect. That might be just chipping off, right? Like getting away with just the right amount of sarcasm that if someone like filed the complaint, you're like, yeah, I did literally say those words. You're like, okay, what was the tone you used? And now we have body cam, right? So you can tell if someone's purposely being disparaging usually. But like, yeah, I did all those things. And looking back, it was response to stress. It was all these things that contributed. And oftentimes I think about it, from being a supervisor for a number of years where you talk about early warning systems, and sometimes it has to do with, calling out, and sometimes it has to do with use of force and incidents and damage to property and all these things and high speed things, and also complaints. Like all these things kind of contribute, missing deadlines, what have you. And then there's the times where officers push back, right? They want to rebel, and that's another form of, getting that adrenaline, kind of dopamine rush, like, hey, I told the boss off and all those guys were in the hallway. And like, now I'm kind of like the rebellious hero. And like, there are those components. So I'm not trying to disparage. I'm trying to illustrate examples that I've seen, and I've even been a part of, just to illustrate that for folks that, hey, you might be closer to this flirting with different types of risk-seeking behavior, which is, it's not a condemnation, it's a recognition that, hey, there are healthier coping practices that we ought to seek for better resilience.
I think they're red flags. I think they're just like indicators. I don't think we should look at them as per se like bad behavior or should you feel bad about yourself. I
Mm-hmm.
think that what we're trying to point out are ways for you to have some insight to realize that maybe you are headed down a bad road. If you start doing these things, they are indicators that you aren't using healthy coping strategies. You aren't taking time for yourself. You aren't taking enough days off. Like those are all, tangible red flags that we can teach our first responders to be on the lookout for, that say, ooh, I am been more sarcastic, or I've gotten more complaints this month than I've ever gotten in my career. Maybe I need to take some days off, or maybe I need to up my workout, or, really I've missed going to church, or I've missed hanging out with family, or I've not done the things that I normally do. And I need to kind of get back on track. So I think that We're not saying that you're a bad people because you do these things, because you're just trying to like maintain. But one thing you said I wanted to mention that it kind of takes us a little bit backwards, but just really quick, sarcasm. Huge issues in relationships because first responders are extremely sarcastic and
Mm-hmm.
have that dark humor. Um, and, in my marriage, it works because I was a first responder. So I get it. My first language is sarcasm. So it works. But in some relationships where your spouse is not a first responder and doesn't come from that, sarcasm just sometimes really, it can be offensive and is a issue I hear all the time. Like, well, I didn't think that was funny.
Yeah, no, that's such a good piece, and it's like know your audience and doing that pre-work. Uh, I do want, and I'm looking at a note and to talk about since you just brought it up and reminded me, uh, couples that are both first responders, right? And so there are some commonalities. We're speaking the same language, but also some challenges that come with that. One of the notes I made from our last discussion was that judgmental aspect, right? Where like especially cops. That's what I know, right? So walking around, you're assigning people's stories, right? It's like you're reading these characteristics and these things again because watching people and noting behavior has kept you safe. It's a survival mechanism. So now you're like super judgy, and we talk about we eat our own. We're extremely judgy within our own groups of like these people. If no one else, these are the people that are gonna step up and literally save you. Like they're there for you, and we're so mean to each other. We're so callous. So yeah, thoughts there. I kind of opened up that potential spider's nest.
Well, as a really quick, and then I'll give it to you, Esther. As a dual first responder family in my
Mm-hmm.
house, the big thing is the power for who's going to be the alpha and who's going to be in charge is a big issue, because if you have two first responders, doesn't matter what they do, right? Like you said, Eric, you are always doing threat assessment. You have to be in charge of your scene for safety. You have to be in charge of and control people's behaviors. And so when both of those get together in a home, it's kind of like who's going to be the alpha today and who's going to make the decisions and be in charge. And so that's the biggest thing that I see in my dual first responder couples.
Yeah, there you've been patient. It's so fun, and I'm just gonna tell the listeners, it's so fun watching both of you because I could see you both light up and have so much. So yeah, there.
Yes, I was thinking about the power equaling control equaling safety and how important it is for our nervous systems as humans, as living beings, to know that we are safe and that we can keep our loved ones safe. And I was thinking about how, just going back to couples where there's one first responder and the other one is not, and noticing the red flags and how the non first responder realizes this is not who I married. And sometimes, or a lot of the time, they communicate that to the first responder. So that goes back to the whole sense of I'm failing, the sense of guilt. And it just, how do we make this better? I'm just thinking about that. And is it education? Is it communication? Is it all of it? And the identity piece as well. I want to say so much, but
Yeah, yeah.
Dr. Mynda mentioned, these are red flags that anyone involved in that first responder's life hopefully can reach out to them, let them know, hey, this is what's going on, this is what I'm witnessing, and having your peers also tell you. And
Mm-hmm.
going back to feeling good, I was thinking about how self-awareness can feel so good because it can lead to curiosity. It can lead to thinking about, okay, I'm noticing this now. What do I want to do about it? Rather than just falling into that river and letting it just drag you, but rather latching onto something and saying, okay, I'm noticing this. What do I want to do about this? Who can I reach out to? And I think that comes with communication too. But if there's no self-awareness, it's hard, because also self-awareness has to do with slowing down. And
Yep.
as first responders, the slowing down piece is not necessarily something that sounds great.
Yeah, absolutely. You hit on so many things, and I think that's a perfect time to transition to what do we do, right? Because I recognize there's so much value, not just for first responders and in looking inward, but also looking to their peers, their partners, also for spouses. Like I imagine this is going to be very helpful to kind of get that peek in with tangible things. And what I want to start with is, for my first responder brain, especially for those that are very operationally fixated and tactically fixated, like recognize the carryover where this can help you, right? And so when we look at how we're going to be our best, we're objective and we brief before the thing happens, right? We plan, we look at maps, we look at, we everyone explains their role, right? And then we also debrief. So like, hey, what went well, what didn't go well? And in that, to have an appropriate process in all of that, you have to release judgment of yourself and your peers so you can actually have that psychological safety to have the conversation. And so if in most experienced first responders, military, they hear all that, they're like, yeah, absolutely, you need to do all that's just part of being professional. We need to do that to be our best. All right, cool, let's take the same mindset and bring it over to our family dynamics. So we pre-plan, we talk about, hey, I'm a new first responder, or, hey, I'm a 12-year first responder and I realize we have a lot of opportunities. Let's talk about what's happened in the past, right? Let's talk about what didn't go so well, the times I undershared. Let's talk about times I overshared. Me personally, raising my hand, like when I just felt like I had to tell my wife that I found a human head, and to see her face like shift, and I was like, I overshared, clearly overshared. Uh, all that to say, yeah, let's bring it into tangible things. And I know Thayer might have to hop off before too long, but yes, Thayer, why don't I start with you then?
Sure. I was thinking about how to bring the skill set that is important at the job, how to bring it back home, and the planning piece. I work with couples who tell me I don't want to do that because it just sounds lame. It sounds like a business plan. Why should we do that in our relationship? And that's why. That's exactly why. So that you know the limitations, so that you know what works, what doesn't work, so that you know what to do in specific situations, and that you're both part of the same plan. You come up with the plan together. And I mentioned this earlier, it's a collaborative effort. So it creates more connection rather than creating the isolation that tends to lead to the problems. And I usually tell them, you're both partners in this business, the business meaning the relationship. You both rely on each other. You can both come up with the rules together and the expectations. And it is so important because there's something that's already planned. You cannot just wing your whole relationship, because you can see how in businesses that does not necessarily work. So I bring that same idea into relationships. And most of
Yeah.
the time I say it can be something fun. It doesn't have to be something really serious. You can experiment. You can do a lot of trial and error. And if you don't do the trial and error, then you're not going to know what works and what lands and what doesn't work. So it can be a fun experiment.
Yeah. Yeah. And you all did share a couple examples, right? Dr. Minda kind of saying, hey, like, it's been a day. Maybe you have these code words, right? You socialize that beforehand so it's not like a surprise. And I've also heard this where people can share where they're at, right? Hey, I'm at a 2, and that means I need to recharge like before I dive in. Or someone's like, I'm at an 8. What do you need? Like I got you. And just really putting some commonalities and some common language to it. Um, I love that. I love how you shared that, Dr. Minda.
So this was a huge problem in my own marriage. And I talk about it quite extensively in a book I wrote about relationships and stuff. But because what would happen is this: I stayed home for 12 years, right, to take care of the kids. And it plays on what we talked about earlier about guilt. My husband would come home and he would just try to jump right in, and he would try to do things. And for me, I stayed home and I was kind of like, no, 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 that's not how we do it. That's not when we do it. Don't do that. Wait, and so I inadvertently kind of pushed him out of the system because I had a way that I did it
Hmm.
for my own, sanity and trying to do things. So, we struggled with that for years and getting into fights. And he's like, well, I'm just trying to help. And I'm like, well, don't. And then I'm mad that he didn't help. And it's kind of this like no win situation. And so what we finally came up with was, and you can do this, for my husband was fire, so he would do it the night before, but for law enforcement, you can do it before your shift's over or before you go to bed. But it's kind of like, what does your day look like? So this is the conversation my husband would ask me. He'd say, what does your day look like? And what do you need from me? Because he is coming back into my system, right? That I've been there all day. And so he would be like, what do you need from me? And I learned with age and my education, of course, is that I'm going to utilize that task driven operational brain that I know is existing. And so I'm going to give him the task that I need from him. Maybe it's go by the store on the way home, or maybe it's, help pick up the kids, or maybe it's to do a chore for me when he gets home, because he's still operational, and it's going to work that way because he knows what I need from him so he can walk in the door and do that. And so that's how we started that, plan. And it really helped our relationship because he'd come in the door and we'd already have the plan set. So there wasn't that frustration. The other thing that we did that helped was about the moods. And we let each other off the hook. So it's okay to be in a bad mood. No one expects you to be rainbows and unicorns all the time. And so it's okay to say, listen, I just had a bad day. I don't really want to talk about it, or I'm not necessarily sure what it is. I just am in a mood, but it's not you. It has nothing to do with you. It's just me. And so when you're young, you want to like pick at it, right? Are you sure? What can I do? What's wrong? You just want to kind of chase it and pick at it. But with age and maturity and wisdom, and hopefully what we're passing on is it's okay to be like, okay, my husband says, is there anything I can do to help with that mood? And a lot of times it's like, no. And he's like, okay. And then we just kind of go do our own thing and give each other that space, because I know it's not me, because he's let me off the hook, or vice versa.
Yeah, that's so huge. I think blending that, and it was reminding me of this aspect that they're introduced, which is like when people get upset, it's lame, it's boring. This is like too much like a business. It's like, well, there's a lot that is not fun about things that are important, like, but we really need to invest. Just like you have a business plan before you open up a business, hopefully, and you get investors and all this, and you prove like this kind of proven success. Like, hopefully, we're doing that, and then in this introducing and injecting this first responder life, we're doing that more. And business, shoot, like there's resources. You're here at home. Oh, now you're not here for 48, 72 hours. Like, how is the business going to function? There's all these tasks, and there's money coming in and there's money going out. And so there, for sure, we don't want to emulate a business, but there's certainly some aspects that we should maybe recognize how that objectivity could be really helpful. I made a couple notes and some of the things that we ought to all work on for ourselves and be aware of, which is the communication. You both have shared a lot of tips and themes to consider, that element of control. Dr. Mynda even shared in her own household how to communicate and navigate those control things. What are your thoughts about that hyper-vigilance, which might not change, but we might be able to toggle it differently at home, and or like that disconnection piece? There, if you have anything on that.
As I was listening to Dr. Mynda talk, I was thinking about how to build trust. And if we can come up with, air quotes, the business plan, then we can just let that go and we can just do our lives, and trusting that the other person, because you built this together, the other person is going to be showing up. And when they don't show up, or when I'm not showing up, that we are clear that we can talk about it, maybe not immediately, but that there's a set structure. Once there's trust, or when there is trust, our nervous system tends to relax, and the hypervigilance tends to lower. So the building trust is so important, and we build trust with language and also the nonverbals. So it's also about going back to the self-awareness, being self-aware of how I show up, my tone of voice, my sarcasm, my facial expressions, my body in the space. And it's about experimenting. It doesn't have to be this very cut and dry thing, because it's already so heavy at work that, and that's why there's this need for just the being sarcastic, being crass. So how do I bring that into my home? So it's about also the playfulness. right? It all kind of boils down to, I'm being playful right now. I'm trying to not be in this very structured mode that can affect all relationships. So I think I kind of went far from your question, Eric, but
No, you did hit it. And yeah, it's like that reminder of that once we establish all these things, we start building and improving communication and these elements and dynamics of control. Ultimately, we're trying to get back to safety, and that's trust, right? Like, I mentioned psychological safety, like trust at work, but yeah, the same thing at home. Like once the scene is safe, right, we can like do our thing. And so it's almost like doing all that pre-work, doing the maintenance of this machine, of this business, quote unquote, this relationship, and then we have fun, right? We remember what our real common bond here is, and it's love and it's care and it's building this like amazing life together. We have to do the work though, and we should. And right, you start small, like anything. Start small, be patient, reserve judgment in yourself, give grace. Those are the things I'd inject. But I wanna flip it to both of you on any thoughts, kind of tying this together, what you want to leave folks with.
I just want to mention, because of trust, and I do have to hop off very soon, the trust, the safety, the security, the control, all of these words, we're just using these words, but what does it mean to the person? What does safety mean to me? Because it's going to be very different from what safety means to you, what control means to you, what risky behaviors mean to you. So it's about really noticing what it means to me as a person, as an individual. And then once I have that self-awareness, I can build something from that, and I can let my significant other what that means to me. So that's one thing that I would add.
Yeah. No, that makes so much sense. I want to be mindful of your time there. So you don't just hop off. Can you please tell people, thank you so much. And I love this conversation. I think it was better than the first. Can you please tell listeners where they can find you and get a hold of you if they have more follow-up?
Absolutely. You'll have my email address, and
Yep, and it'll be in the show notes.
Yes. I am a licensed practitioner in Colorado. I'll be starting my private practice very soon. And yeah, social media is where I'm at. But yeah, thank you for having me again, Eric. It was very nice to see you both. I can be here for 3 more minutes and keep learning from you both.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much there. Dr. Mynda, I'm going to turn it over to you. Any additional thoughts, summaries, or just keep going? I don't want to hold you
No,
here too long, but appreciate
no,
it.
I'm good. So what I was thinking is we were talking about, the business plan and stuff, and the way I reference it is a family mission
Mm,
statement, right? And so they're a really good book I recommend to a lot of people, my first responders, because they can relate. Because I try to make metaphors or give examples in first responder terminology because it kind of just clicks in their brain. But The Mission, the Men, and Me is a really good book. It's a leadership book, but what it talks about is if you always have that order in your mindset, right, and you're focused on the mission first, the men being the other people, and then yourself, you're never going to fail. It's always going to work out, because you're always focusing and making decisions about the mission. And the mission is our relationship and our families, right? Outside of work. And if you've created this mission statement or a mission idea with your spouse and your kids and your family dynamic, whatever that is, then the decisions you make and all of the actions you take will be in the direction of that mission. And so if the business plan feels too businessy, then if we could maybe just shift it to about the mission. The other thing is showing respect. One of the things that I see is that in first responder relationship, there's this competition of who's tired is more tired,
mm,
or who works harder in the relationship, right? And I think the biggest thing is if we're focused on the mission, then we understand that each role is just as equally as important, right? And so for our first responders to go out there and live the dream and do the job that they do, they need that counterpart to do all the other things. It doesn't make it less than. It means that as a mission and as a team, we're focused on the same direction. And so I think showing respect to the spouse is really important. And the biggest thing that I tell people, and it's really all I wanted as a spouse, was say thank you. Be appreciative that I am picking up the pieces. I am doing all these other things. Maybe I've delayed a career. Maybe I've had these sacrifices for our mission, but I want to be respected and I want to be thanked. I want that to be appreciated, that I'm part of the team, just because I'm not out there saving lives and running and gunning, but that my position is just as equally as important to our mission.
Yeah. I love. Oh, there. Thank you so much. He's waving off. Yeah, I love that because I've been kicking around and I've been nudged to work on my personal constitution, and I've shared about that on social media relatively recently. But a lot of that is literally finding that like core mission, like for each of us as individuals. And again, like we talked about identity at the very beginning, but it can't be like be the best cop ever, because even if I'm doing this job till I'm 65, which would be like nuts, I have
That'd
no
be long.
plans to do that in this form. But I one day it's gonna stop, right? It might stop next week, it might stop in 20 years. It's gonna stop, but I still need to be a person. And so yeah, like I identify with service, and that was a huge theme in my personal constitution, in my personal mission. For as many days as I have on this earth, mission is a piece, and it has to be family first, because my family, if I do things right according to my mission and my constitution, will outlast my work, my profession. And so I think that's a very uncomfortable thing for some people, but it's healthy. We look at it and just simplify. Hey, like this is a great aspect. And I've said this before. I've been a cop for now 17 years. I've been a parent for 5. Police work is easy. Like I could
Oh
do
yeah.
that basically on autopilot in a lot of ways now. But man, like day to day, I think I have it. I'm I'm wise enough to know I'll never have it figured out as far as parenting and what my daughter requires and how I can better show up, because I'll never be best. I'll do the best I can. But all to say, shout out to the whoever's running the household, or taking lead. Even dual income families, like whoever's raising your family, that's the mission. I mean, for so many of us. So I think it's just it might sound a little curt, but hey, like let's remember the priorities here. And I love how you even illustrated with that, with the mission, the men in me. I think a lot of us can put the me last, but then they forget it. Like it just actually falls off the table, which is not,
Right.
it does not work,
Yeah.
right? And I know that you're a huge proponent of wellness. We talked about that more specifically in the last conversation, but yeah, we can't let it fall off. It needs to be. That's why we talk about so much on the show. Like we need to take care of ourselves, and so that we can take care of others, and so we can
And
maintain.
and here's the other thing that's the huge is first responders, your jobs and your brain is reactive. You don't
Hmm.
show up before the crime happens or before the fire starts. And so we're not so good about being proactive. And so we wait till we're in full meltdown crisis. And then we're
Mm.
like, oh, I need to do something. Well, now your brain isn't even working in a logical way. It's very impulsive and emotional. And so it's really hard to come up with a plan of action to take care of yourself in the midst of the crisis. And so my huge platform and my soapbox is have, like you've trained, have a plan in place, and it's okay that we fall off of the plan sometimes because we get busy and just life. But if you have the plan in place already, it's easy to get back on track, right? If you have the wellness plan and how you take care of yourself and your family is kind of implemented, then when you realize and those triggers and red flags we already talked about show up, you can say, oh man, I'm not being good at this. Let me get back on track. And so, whatever that looks like for you, it's easier than when you're trying to come up with the plan in crisis. The other thing I suggest, find a clinician before you need it.
Hmm.
You can just establish that relationship and then kind of put it on the back burner. Doesn't mean you got to go every day. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It just means that if you need somebody to vent to, and I love, like you said, you had to tell your wife about you found a human head.
I had to
You
tell
can tell the
somebody. I'm
clinician.
sorry, it was her.
No, that is a thing you have to tell somebody.
Yeah.
But you can have a clinician that is non-biased and is prepared to hear that. Especially if you get one that's culturally competent, that works with first responders, they can handle it. You don't
Hmm.
have to worry about burdening them. You can tell them whatever, dump it on the therapist floor and you're out.
Yep.
And at least you empty, what's up in your head.
Yep. And if they're a good one, as I've heard from other clinicians, they'll have their own person too, and so
Yes.
it pay it forward or you give it back, all
Hmm.
this stuff. Yeah, I love that aspect of being proactive because it reminds me of a compliment I got from a mentor, and he said that I was a really good gardener and not so much a firefighter. And I was like, wait, I want to be a good firefighter. Like
Oh,
I was
yeah.
like, that's like. He's like, no, you can fight fire fine. Like you can fight fire like the rest of us. I was like, but some of us in this industry are just putting out the fires. Like catastrophe hits, this big issue, this is coming down the pipe, address it, fix it, do the best with what you have to affect the situation. It's like, whereas like you're planting seeds, you're watering. So I took that when he explained it, I took it as a huge compliment. But and we could apply that to every aspect of our life. Like just because things feel like they're going well doesn't mean we don't continue to invest, right? Like my relationship with my daughter is great. Doesn't mean I ignore her and don't have quality time for the next 3 days and see where it lands me. Um, Fitness is good, right? Like props to Dr. Mynda who went on a run this morning.
Mhm.
She shared before the recording started, but yeah, it doesn't mean like, hey, I feel good. I'm not achy. I'm just gonna not exercise for a couple months. Then we see how all these things can exacerbate, and it's applicable to any area of our life.
I also, the big thing I hear, that we talked about earlier is guilt. And so what I see is our first responders, they feel guilty because they've been gone. So
Hmm.
they feel like, well, then I don't really deserve to take time for myself because I've already been away. And so I need to spend whatever time I have with my spouse, my kids, my family. And so their self-care starts getting pushed further and further. But I always challenge people, have various coping strategies based on time you have, right? It's like I did run today, but I only ran a mile and a half because I didn't have a lot of time today. But I was like, it's better than nothing and doing
Hmm.
nothing for myself today, where maybe tomorrow I'm going to go do hot Pilates for an hour and get my butt kicked in there, right?
Yes. Yes.
So it's about having different resources. And even if you listen to a good podcast or a book on the way home, just to kind of get your mind right and start to bring yourself down a little bit. Running by the store or running an errand before you get home, it helps start shifting that mindset back to home brain so that when you walk in the door, you're not like at a 10, just wound up, still coming off of a late call maybe that you had. You're slowly winding that brain down. But the biggest thing is being cognizant that you are hypervigilant. It's just part of the job and we can't make it go away. We can just adapt and start to do things to take care of ourselves beforehand to mitigate it.
Yeah, I love that. And you said like kind of that better than nothing. Like my wife and I utilize that all the time, and it's going to be in this course that I'm working on. She's helping me with. So a lot of it has to do with wellness, injecting into work-life balance, and especially for first responders. Like, yeah, we're not the normal people that can just put on a calendar our weekly thing. Hey, I'm gonna hit the gym Monday, Wednesday, Friday without fail. Well, sometimes duty calls and you don't get to, or you're really going to sacrifice, you're going to burn it on both ends to get to the gym, which might take 2 hours with a commute and changing and showering and all that. And then you ignore your family that you hadn't seen. And then we feel guilty, right? So we're pouring it on, we're trying to achieve in this aspect and at the detriment of this other one, which is, I love what you said, right? This day I can run. It's a short run. It's not what I love, but it's what I got. And then on that day off, then I have my full on, like I'm going to do my hot yoga, whatever, right? So another example is, yeah, you really would love to speak to your clinician. Something happened, you got to reschedule. Well, hit that peer support, right? Like talk to your buddy, your battle buddy, or journal, right? Maybe you don't love journaling, but you just write it down. I found a human head. And you're like, actually, I feel a little better. I think I literally put it out in the world. No one has to read this. I might revisit it later, and be like, yeah, that was pretty gnarly. Okay, on with my life, right? So I love the little doses, especially for first responders, because something is better than nothing. Even if you are able to throw an apple, in your bag on the way out, at least you ate an apple today. At least it wasn't all fast food. So like give grace again. Like these little things do add up a lot, and they become your habits. And I love how you explain that. Like have different coping mechanisms, because a lot of us types like to, working out really hard might be our mechanism. Well, shoot, that might not be highly available. So introducing some breath work. I mean, you can do that anywhere, anytime. And so
Mhm.
little things, just stay open, stay curious. I love that.
Yeah, not you can't have an all or nothing thinking, right? Because I can't get the 2 hours in, I'm not going to do anything,
Yeah, I
and
think we're
cutting
like
yourself
wired
some
that way a lot
slack.
of times though.
We are.
Especially
Yeah.
our culture. That's me. Like
Mhm.
I'm the light switch and my wife is the dimmer.
Yep.
And it's half the gallon of ice cream for me or nothing. And I don't need ice cream ever, really. But if I dip in, I'm going all in. She's like, have 2 bites, put it away. And it's just like
Yeah.
I think it's self-selecting with our type of culture at times.
Well, and I think it's the career too, right? You got to go all in. You can't half search a house or half,
Mm-hmm.
arrest somebody. Like it's just, you have to go all in. And so it is hard to shift that hat, right? Like I'm at home, I don't have to go all in, but I think the biggest thing is we are our own worst enemies and we are so hard on ourselves and we are
Yep.
so critical. And we have to start cutting ourselves some slack and giving ourselves grace and quit beating ourselves up over everything that we do or try to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wonder how much that is for the first responder spouse as well,
Oh yeah.
because of all these dynamics we talked about. I know, like, I know my wife is very self critical as well. And I talked to one of my guys at work, and I'll just share this because of what you highlighted, in that we're so disposed to being self critical, being our own worst critic. It was kind of this element where I'm like, hey, I know you've already been self critical and you're pouring it on. Like, I think it's healthy to recognize, like, don't be ashamed. Like, that is feeding you your motivation. You have this sense of development and betterment. Cool. Like, part of that is very useful. Can you realize that if you continue to pour it on, that's not helping you be more successful or more driven? He's like, no, for sure. He's like, I appreciate it. I was like, I see it in you because that's me, right? Like, and so many of us, like, I
Mhm.
think of these specific officers that I've encountered or worked with or supervised through the years, specific ones that are super, like, kind of over the top hard on themselves. And oftentimes it's just reminding, hey, don't be mad at yourself for being critical, but recognize, like, there's a purpose, and now you're past that purpose. Now let's go do the thing.
When we're critical on ourselves too, what we tend to do without realizing it, we have this super high standard for ourselves. We sometimes impose it on other people in our lives, right?
Uh-huh.
Like, well,
Mm-hmm.
that's not how I would do it,
Yep.
or I wouldn't have said it like that. And so, without even realizing it, we take that standard that sometimes is not even obtainable, and we impose it on others, and then we don't understand why, you know, we feel like failures, other people feel like failures. The other thing you said about spouses feel it as well. I know I did because when I stayed home, I wanted to feel like I contributed as much as he did. And so I would go crazy about, let's get the house cleaned. We got to
Mm-hmm.
get everything done because I felt like I wanted to do my part as part of the team. And so I was very over the top OCD about everything because
Yeah.
I just wanted to prove that I brought something to the table.
Yeah. And I know that is very true. That's a dynamic for non-first responder families as well. Like, I
Hmm.
know that for sure. And I love how you highlighted that self-judgment manifesting into judgment of others. Like, I'll raise my hand. No one can see it. Actually, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't even know if you saw it because it went off screen. But
Yeah.
yeah, it took me quite a while to realize that. Why am I so critical, and why am I so, these high standards of myself and others? And yeah, it's a me thing. It's not a you thing usually, but some of us, we need to step up. I'll just say that. Not the
Yeah.
people listening to the show, but yeah, for sure. And it's like, it's very helpful to recognize that and just turn it back inward in that introspective notion to, okay, what can I learn from this, and what opportunities uh, can I use to affect this through decompression, through better balance, all these things that we talked about.
Always evolving. We're humans. Just because maybe there's something you've identified you need to work on, it doesn't mean it's necessarily a flaw or a bad thing. It's just as we get older, that's why they say, like, old people are wise. Well, the only reason they're wise, it's not like they were anointed at some age. It's that we've figured it out as we've gone along on this road. And we just want to be able to say, hey, here's what's up around the corner. Here's better ways for you to enjoy this path. It's not a criticism that you're a bad person or something you should feel bad about. It's just, as humans, we're always growing and evolving, and we should always be open to that.
Yeah, I love that. It is that it's going through the reps. You have the time, you have the insight from your own trial and error, your own successes and mistakes, and for the more wise, the observing others' mistakes, not making them your own, which is, I mean, what a way to kind of circle all of this, which is to say, like, thank you for being our teacher today, and me trying to be ever the student, and I sense that that's you as well, which is why you have this accumulation of wisdom, personal and insight from others as well. So, Dr. Mynda, thank you so much for coming on part 1 and 2, which is just set up this so much, I think, so well. Can you please tell the listeners please tell them about your work? I mean, you're an author too. You have a couple works there, and where people can find you, where they can find your books.
So I have 2 books and they're on Amazon. The first one is called Fully Involved. It's a guide to being in a relationship with a firefighter. However, it does apply to all first responders. It was my first book. I wish I'd have made it a little bit more, like the title more general, but the first couple chapters are about fire. You can skip those, and the rest is all relationship. My kids wrote a chapter about growing up as in a first responder family. And at the end of the book, the first book, there's all sorts of communication activities that we've talked about, actually. How there's even a questionnaire about how to set up that framework in your household about how to talk about the job. The second book is probably a whole nother podcast for you, but it's When the Calls Stop, Retiring as a First Responder, which is going to be huge in the next 5 years. We're going to have a huge exodus of our retirees. And like you said about identity, my caseload has jumped with the retirees and figuring out what's my purpose. Who am I now? So that's the second book, and that's on Amazon. I have a website, Fully Involved Life is what it's called. And I am on social media under my name. I'm always open. I get people that message me looking for resources or help. I have tons of resources, whether it be clinicians, good books to read, good podcasts, networking. I have so much networking in the entire nation with peer support. So I have a lot of resources and am available if people are just looking for good resources. I do speak and teach. If anybody's interested in the topics we've talked about and they're looking for that, I am available for that as well. So like I said, I'm just very passionate, and I want our first responders to be able to retire mentally healthy, to enjoy their lives. They've done so much. They deserve that.
Yeah, I love that. And thank you again for highlighting that retirement identity piece, because, I had a recent recording that'll air, soon around this one. I don't know if it'll be before or after, but regardless, the point was so much about what law enforcement needs. And it was, 2 of the panelists were ex-cops, and they're not full retirees, right? And one was my buddy Trevor, and the other is a guy JT that runs Survive Policing, right? And so it's a social media account to help officers be safe and be mindful of all these things. But I think there's so much carryover that we need to realize from the rookie to the mid-career, because what is even mid-career? I mean, we have generations and just dynamics that it's probably leading more towards so many 5, 10-year, 15-year careers. And thank you for your service. That's amazing, right? Like when people do 4 years in the military, like, thank you for your service. Awesome. Maybe they're not lifers, but there's so much still identity and adjustment and fear and challenge in that. So much we can learn and should be learning from our retirees. And I feel grateful for the couple retirees that have come on the show to speak to that specifically, because we should be thinking about it from the very beginning.
Yeah, we should. And, it's the biggest issue is you get into this career thinking you're going to do 30 years. You're like athletes, right? You can have a career ending injury at any moment. And in my second book, I did a survey monkey, and 600 first responders of all different types responded. I asked the question, did you create a backup plan? What's your backup plan if you get hurt? 86% had no backup plan. And that's huge, because again, you guys are going out there every day and you could get an injury. So again, pre-planning, I go back to that all the time, is you have to pre-plan for life and the things that can be thrown in there.
Yeah, I love that. And in 2020, I as a patrol squad sergeant with a pretty young crew, and heads were swirling, and we talked about stuff every day, how to do our best and use the best sound, like kind of slowing down team tactics and all these things because of all the noise and all the change. But one thing that I did was I sat down with each one. I said, hey, what is your backup plan? And I actually wrote an article and I submitted it, but it didn't get published. I can't imagine why, right? Like, we're not going to publish in a police periodical, like, hey, maybe you shouldn't be a cop. And that's not my point. My point was we all should recognize, one, other passions that I truly believe will make us better at our jobs. There was a guy that was like, well, I took up welding in school and I never, I think it's fun. I'd love to do it more. I'm like, cool, do it more. Your homework is to weld something before the end of the month. It's also to look at like local trade school and like look at how do they offer courses? What's the frequency? What does it cost? At least like you have something in the back of your brain where you're like, okay, that's not so bad. People talking about going back to school, how they're good with numbers, they'd be an accountant. Cool. Like at least we had the conversation where I know for a fact that thinking about that makes you recognize potential, which makes you happier to be here, even if you choose to keep fleshing that out. I mean, not to go too much down that rabbit hole, but it was something that was really uncomfortable for me to do. But ultimately, I think that we need to, right? We talk about backup guns, we talk about backup flashlights, all these things, and yet, something as big of a career, life changing. Yeah, we need to think about it.
Well, and you guys can retire at 50-ish, right?
Mm-hmm.
You could that's still a lot of life to live. And there's opportunity for second careers,
Yeah.
And so you should. And, my son is 27 and he may have to medically retire because he got injured on the job. And so he's 27 and he has no backup plan. So he's taking school while he's off on injury right now to try to figure that out.
Yeah.
You just never know with this career. And so that's why having that skill or having at least something in the back of your head, like, well, if then this.
Yeah, which is great that he's using that time to go back to school. It's like that's something I've specifically nudged some people I know that have been on some long-term leave. I was like, hey, like, take some classes. We support, like, the department supports this, right? Like, there's a lot of ancillary stuff, but then there's also just stuff that's totally in this other realm that may or may not directly affect it. I tend to believe that if you're going to learn one thing and be passionate about it, you can probably find a way to kind of parlay it back in and feed this thing. But yeah, we got to continue to develop ourselves. And if you feel uncomfortable with that idea, then it really means you ought to force yourself to delve in a little bit.
Yeah, when we avoid topics, that's the topic we need to go after, actually.
Right? Isn't that the thing?
Yeah. That's the thing.
Well, Dr. Mynda, thank you so much again.
Absolutely.
And I really appreciate everything, and continue to look at what you do because you're still busy, still out there and doing all this amazing stuff.
Thank you again for having me. And, sorry for the technical issues. And I hope this, this reaches people and it hits somebody out there that needed it.
Yeah, I'm very confident it will. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.